Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me for the talk on best practice development for large and distributed teams. I was meant to be doing the talk today with my ex-business partner, Carl. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, so I'm on my own. Unfortunately, he was the most technical of the two of us, so I'm going to do my best to answer any questions you've got, but I might have to defer some answers till later. We came up with the concept of the talk a couple of months back. As Mayfly's grown, the agency's about five years old. Development team's obviously grown beyond just the two of us, and we collaborate with each other. Carl does a lot of work with us still. We've got a development team of like 9 devs, and we collaborate with other agencies, and this presents a lot of operational challenges. Obviously, when you're working with multiple developers on a single project, or you might be working with people that are external to your agency. So this is really just a lot of our findings and learnings that we've kind of found throughout the year. And thanks to a few of the guys internally as well who's put a lot of work in putting the presentation together. So I guess we can group the challenges that we might find in these kind of like key areas. Effectively, multiple developers working on the same project. It's very different from just a single developer sat with Visual Studio, local database. There's a lot of challenges to be solved there. Working in distributed teams, you might be working with a freelancer that works at home or another agency that works in a different office. From a technical perspective, from a project management and process perspective, there's challenges to be solved there. Tooling, how can we look at tooling to make our lives easier so that our developers don't get stopped in their tracks when they're developing a project? And documentation is the Bible for us as developers. We've all been handed that really verbose specification that's a billion pages long but doesn't actually say anything. So how can we look at the documentation that we write to make sure that when we start development, we're able to develop productively? So we first, obviously, the first place we can look to solve some of these challenges is with infrastructure. And what we're trying to do is prevent downtime. We're trying to prevent developer downtime. Those really frustrating instances where you're sat there twiddling your thumbs because your computer's not working, network's down, that kind of thing. And obviously our server and infrastructure, servers and not just live servers, but stage, QA, the kind of servers that we rely on during the project process when we're deploying code for testing, keeping those things up and running can make sure we can develop productively. If our QA server's down, we're all going to be scrambling to try and get that server back online. Effectively, we're just trying to ensure a high level of productivity and efficiency. But by infrastructure, we don't just mean our servers. We mean anything kind of technical, anything that's in the office, our computers, our networking, that kind of thing, and where we can make some improvements to make sure that we're effective. Firstly, when we first started, we were cool, we were a startup, we were all sat on beanbags, working off a wireless network, playing hockey at lunchtime and stuff. Wireless networks are rubbish. When your team grows and you've got 10, 15 developers working off a wireless network, that additional bit of latency is going to add up. And we're talking about milliseconds, right? Milliseconds difference between a wireless connection and a wired connection. But you multiply those milliseconds over every request for every developer, for every day that developer's working on a project, and the amount of downtime you're going to experience is going to equate to hours, if not days. So just invest in a wired network. Invest in a reliable and fast internet connection. We persisted for months with a high street broadband provider, a fiber connection. I'm not going to mention their name, but it was a business line, but it used to go down 5 or 6 times a day. So we had a development team of 7 or 8 guys sat there 5 or 6 times a day, not being able to do anything. Project managers not being able to use their cloud-based tools. It stopped us in our tracks, and we persisted for months and months and months. We eventually bit the bullet and invested in a lease line, and our cost went from 50 quid a month to 350 quid a month, but it paid for itself in a day. If we totaled up the amount of time that we lost from all of those downtimes caused by our internet connection being down, and again, multiplied it by every developer, multiplied that by our day rate, and and all the days that we were working on a project, we lost weeks worth of time, and we hacked off a lot of clients just because our internet connection was pretty poor. Invest in a lease line, it will pay for itself in about 2 days. And that's probably had the biggest impact on our productivity over the past year. Invest in fast computers. I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but having slow computers can really, really slow a developer down. If the average developer is running 50 builds a day, and that's probably conservative, and that build's taking 1 minute to run, and again, you're multiplying that by the amount of days you have in your project and by your day rate, it's costing you a lot of money working on slow computers. So if you're going to do one thing after this talk is go home and pester your bosses to invest in better computers. If you can bring that build time down by half, you've kind of, you've decreased the amount of time by half that you're sat there doing nothing, just waiting for your project to build. Invest in reliable computers. We again kitted out our development team with high street brand laptops, but they weren't designed for business users. They weren't designed to be on for 7, 8, 9 hours a day. Components start to fail, monitors start to break, that kind of stuff. And again, it's incredibly frustrating as a developer to be sat there when you can't trust your equipment. So invest in the business-grade hardware. It only costs a couple of £100 extra to get that gear, and it's going to keep you being productive. But this sounds expensive, right? You're all going to go home and go back to your bosses and ask for another 15 grand to upgrade everybody's computers. But it doesn't have to be expensive. You can lease. You can go to Dell or PC World Business and get a leasing agreement within an hour. You can have 6 laptops delivered tomorrow, and it will cost you £200 a month rather than a 15 grand's worth of capital expenditure outlay. And there's leasing agreements from a ton of providers out there. When looking at the next level up, our server infrastructure, there's a lot of literature out there about the best way to deploy a live website. And this isn't about that. This talk isn't about this. This is about the server infrastructure that we need across a large team, across a distributed team. And there we're talking about our QA servers, our test servers, our content entry servers, our preview servers. There's lots of options. There's virtual private servers, cloud, dedicated service. Umbraco as a service that was meant to be infrastructure as a service. To keep us productive, what we're looking for is we don't want any hardware outages. If our QA server's down, the whole development's blocked, we're going to run late on our projects. The testers aren't going to be able to test our code. That's one thing that we need. And the next thing we need is the ability to be able to scale our infrastructure. We could be scaling vertically, so adding more CPUs and RAM to our servers, or we could be scaling horizontally, so adding more servers into the mix. But what we need is to be able to scale quickly. If we're running some load tests on our application, we need to be able to apply those servers quickly. And that kind of rules out, we think, dedicated infrastructure. So we're really just then talking about virtual private servers and infrastructure as a service. Unfortunately, infrastructure as a service doesn't play very nicely with Umbraco, particularly from a kind of a horizontal scaling perspective. Because of the kind of, the master-slave way that load balancing works in Umbraco, you need to know the IP addresses of the other servers in your farm. And things like Azure don't play very nicely with that. They kind of hide the IP addresses of those servers from you. There's ways to get around it, but they require, a few hacks. And for us, that's not best practice. If deploying something to an infrastructure requires us to write a shed load of code just to get it to work, that's not best practice for us. It should be easy, and we should be able to run with it out of the box. Shannon did a great talk on load balancing at this year's Code Garden. It's really, really worth taking a look at that because he goes through the kind of the pitfalls with the infrastructure as a service options. So for us, things like Azure and as infrastructure as a service aren't really appropriate for our server infrastructure, not at the kind of the staging test kind of QA server level. But where they do come in useful is for spinning up instances on check-in. If we're working on a feature and we've got devs commit some code on a feature branch, to automatically create an Azure instance for that feature so that the QA can then go and test that feature in isolation and then tear it down afterwards. So that can really, really speed up, again, the development process so that we can test features in isolation without kind of treading on each other's toes if we've got different developers working on different features. Using things like Git hooks and continuous integration to do that. So for us, for our kind of infrastructure, we use VPSs. There's a ton of providers out there, Azure, AWS, Rackspace, Outsourcery. It requires less custom code. We can just deploy Umbraco instances kind of out of the box and get running pretty quickly. We get fault tolerance, i.e. if some hardware goes down, our server's not going to be offline. If we've got a dedicated server, even if you're using a company like Rackspace, it's going to take them 2-3 hours to replace a component. running on a system like Hyper-V. If our server goes down, it's going to be automatically migrated to another cluster, and our downtime is going to be limited to 30 minutes, and that's kind of an acceptable period of downtime during the development process. Try and look for a provider that offers Hyper-V instances on Windows Server, I think 2013 and above. It means you can kind of vertically scale your servers more. Anything lower than that, and you're limited to the number of CPUs and memory that you can add into your server instances. But with 2013 and above, you can go to tens of gigs of RAM and tens of CPUs. So it really helps with your load balancing. And then obviously, really looking forward to Umbraco as a service and Umbraco 7.3, which has got drastically kind of improved functionality in there for load balancing, so that then allows us now to look at things like infrastructure as a service and Azure for our infrastructure for our development process. So onto development. So what kind of things can we do, or where can we be looking to kind of set things up in our development environments to make sure that we're productive? Effectively, we're looking for efficient development, so that developers aren't frustrated. We can read a specification and just crack on and hit those deadlines and be creative. We're looking for efficient deployments. If we've got a development team, I don't know, 5 or 6 developers, and we're reliant on one senior developer to do those deployments, and he's on holiday or he's off sick. Or you're doing manual deployments and it's not quite working, and you've got to roll back and all that kind of stuff. Like, that can really, really sap the energy out of a project. So how can we improve our deployment procedures to make sure that we can run and not lose any time? And ultimately looking for a maintainable code base. Development teams grow, they change, we use freelancers, new developers come and go, and everybody likes to code a little bit differently and different flavors of development. And the more different styles of development there are in a project, the less maintainable it's going to be, the harder it's going to be for someone to get their head around that code, 2 months down the line. So starting from the front end, and this is kind of more of a question really than a statement, but really trying to understand who it is that's doing your front end integration. If the front end developer's doing the integration, have they got the ability to be able to integrate that code directly to are they going to be doing it directly through Umbraco or through Visual Studio? Have they got the training to be able to do that? The back end dev's going to be doing the integration, if they're going to be passed some HTML from the front end team. Have we accounted for any bugs in that HTML that we're going to need to reintegrate that's going to cost us time later down the line, like planning for these things ahead? Or if we're working with another agency, we collaborate with other agencies, and sometimes the other agency might do the front end work. If they're doing the front end work and they're giving it to us, again, who's doing the integration? Are we doing it? Are they doing it? We think the best way and the most productive way to kind of solve the bottlenecks around front-end integration is to get the front-end devs using back-end tools. Spend the time of training the front-end developers to use Web Matrix or Visual Studio. Views are easy. They're easy to understand. Any front-end dev worth their salt can get their head around a view and put markup straight into there. And the more they can do that, the less reliant they are on the back-end developers, and the more productive you can be. Just prevent that kind of like throwing over the wall of deliverables where front-end devs are throwing markup over to the back-end devs. Get your front-end devs trained up to Umbraco level 1. It's pretty achievable. And what we're not saying is, we're not going to start giving all of our front-end devs a load of complex back-end code to do. But what it will allow them to do is it will enable them to solve their own problems. If they know what a view is, if they know what a document type is, if they know how Umbraco sits together, they're going to be able to solve 30–40% of those problems without coming to us, and that can, again, really keep you productive on your projects. You'll get a really positive and quick turnaround on your return on investment on that one. Source control, it never kind of ceases to amaze me, actually, how many agencies out there don't use source control. We collaborated with an agency recently, and they had 4 developers and never even heard of it. But it's not just good enough to have source control. It's not a tick in the box. You have to have a clear, concise, and documented branching strategy that everybody knows inside out. Got a large team, just having source control. If people are just committing things willy-nilly and you haven't got that branching strategy, it's going to cause you a hell of a lot of problems later in your project lifecycle, trying to unravel those weird commits and merges. So get your branching strategy down on paper, get everybody to know it inside out. When a freelancer joins, drill it into them. Get your PMs trained up on what your branching strategy is. If a PM knows what a pull request is or what a merge is. When we're saying that we're behind because we've got to do this really complex, pull request, you can really save yourself some time there. We use a feature branching strategy. There's environment branching strategies. It doesn't really matter which one you use as long as it's documented down on paper and everybody knows it inside out, and it's worth the investment. Feature branching strategies really, really help when it comes to kind of continuous integration. It allows you to promote your releases across different environments, and I've got a bit on that to come. Build your branching strategy into your standards and your process documents just so that everybody knows it inside out. Be consistent with your ignore files. Have a standard ignore file. Spend some time to understand what it is you're going to ignore from your source control on every single project, and use that as your baseline. Don't have different ignore files, so that, again, what you're looking for is for your team to be able to start a project and know immediately how that project's going to work, and for there not to be any differences. Use a cloud-based provider. Again, we're working with clients and other agencies who are insistent on internally hosting this legacy SVN infrastructure, and it takes a team of six just to keep it running on a daily basis. Just baffles me. There's a ton out there, Bitbucket, GitHub. Just let somebody else take care of the maintenance of it for you. A few quick wins here. Some stuff to not include, and again, this is in the context of a larger distributed team. Don't include your solution. Your project DLLs in the bin. Don't include your Umbraco config file, your examine indexes, your SCO files, OBJ files. csproj.user files, your media files, temp files and log files. Don't put them into source control. Most of the problems you run into in a larger distributed team are kind of, can be due to committing some of that stuff into source, committing your Umbraco config, for example. Try and use some kind of strongly typed doc type mechanism for, creating strongly typed models. If we're not using this, we're relying on, on a lot of magic strings. Magic strings increase the propensity for error, increase the propensity for kind of human error. And across a large team, that has, the potential for risk is greatly increased. We use our own rolled solution. Ditto's a fantastic kind of off-the-shelf solution built by Lee Kelleher. Having stuff strongly typed just means that, we're reducing that propensity for human error. Stuff's going to build, and we know immediately where there's going to be any issues. Do invest the time to create a standard Umbraco setup. Have a standard build that has your commonly used packages, some commonly used doc types, commit it into source control, and then fork your new projects from it. Create a home node, create a global node, create a settings node. But the trick is to not go too far. Don't try and predict too much that on every project you're going to use all this cool functionality that you've put into your Umbraco base build, because the chances are you won't. And with Umbraco, it's a lot easier to add stuff than it is to remove and change stuff. So keep it really, really simple so that you can build on top of it. The mistake we made, and was to try and think we're going to use all this cool kind of like content model in every project, and we didn't. And that meant that every single instance of this base build was kind of different and kind of then defeated the point of it. So do it, but keep it really, really simple. Do you use config transforms for your environments? Of course, for your staged live preview environments, it's a bit of a no-brainer there. Do it on all of your config files, not just on the web.config file. There's a whole folder worth of config files. Use config transforms on those, on your Umbraco settings config, on your Usync config, on whatever configs there are, because those settings are going to differ across your environments. And you don't want to be spending time, obviously, manually changing the values in these files. So use them in continuous integration, and use them on all of your config files. And use them on your local development environment too. Use tools like SlowCheater, or if you download this presentation, add those 3 lines of code into your project file, and you'll be able to apply your config transforms when you build. And again, when working across a large development team or a distributed team, you get to apply your own connection strings when you build, rather than kind of changing stuff in each of your projects. And it's 3 lines of code, and you save yourself a lot of time there. Create a shared media folder. Every single project, the guy that's built the image gallery functionality has got this fantastic set of images on his local development environment, and then I'm writing a feature that might exist on that image gallery page, and the whole page looks crap because I've got no images, and you have to do something crazy like, I don't know, stick your images on a USB file, or something worse like put your images into source control. Set up a shared media directory on a network share. You might need a primary domain controller for this to work. But the amount of time it can save, every single person, every developer spinning up a page that's got an image on it will instantly see those images there straight away, and save you a hell of a lot of time. Can massively speed up your QA process, obviously. You know, if you're moving a story along for a QA to test and they're not having to ask you where the images are for this page, they're automatically there in their environment. That's a big quick win. Put all of your Selenium tests into source control. Whoever's writing them, if your devs are writing them, if your QA is writing them, put them into source control. Any developer that then checks out the solution can automatically run those UI integration tests instantly. Don't just have them sat there on the QA's machine. Have them in source control so every developer can work from them. Spend time on your content modeling. Plan it. Plan it before you get into Umbraco. Draw a mind map of how your document types are going to be related. Whatever those relationships are, if they're picked, if they're nested, if you've got listed, put them on a mind map so you can see them visually, and you can move them around before you get into Umbraco. You'll save yourself a lot of time, and be consistent with the way that you might model similar content. If you're always going to have this global node where you keep all of, a lot of your settings, your social media accounts, that kind of thing, be consistent with how you model your content. Again, when it comes to supporting these sites down the line, the more consistent you are, the more maintainable your code's going to be. Use NuGet. You're probably going to say, yeah, of course. Again, you'd be surprised, but for your Umbraco packages and for Umbraco itself, use the NuGet references for these, for both of these. When it comes to updating and maintaining your code in the future, NuGet's going to send you a lot of time. And do the training. There's a few right ways and lots of wrong ways we found from setting up an Umbraco site. We take on a lot of support contracts where people have built sites externally. And we can always tell instantly whether the code for that website has been written by an Umbraco certified developer. And if it has, you can build on top of it. Every developer can build on top of it. But if it hasn't, there's a real mix mash. The separation of concerns hasn't been understood, and you might have one big template with a load of business logic in it, and just really, really weird things going on. Invest, get your bosses to pay for your training, go and do the training, and then everybody's working in the same way. And again, you're going to have a really, really maintainable code base going forward. Invest in your builds and continuous integration infrastructure. Again, there's a lot of documentation out there on how to do this properly. But what we're looking for, really, is for our code to be built when we check code in, or when we merge code. Again, if you've got a large team or a distributed team, those constant check-ins, just getting the build server to do all of the hard work for us so that we know that a developer hasn't forgot to build their solution before committing their code, that we get notified when there's errors. Single-click deployments, allowing a PM, the panacea of allowing a project manager to deploy some code across an environment. We use a tool called Octopus Deploy. Works, again, really, really well with a feature branching strategy. Effectively allows us, these orange and green boxes are releases. You can click for a release to go across to another environment. And if that's in the hands of a PM and not in the head of a senior developer for some really, really complicated deployment process, we can keep you guys productive and save a lot of time with deployments. Also allows us to do really, really quick rollbacks. We can click a button and roll back to a previous version. And again, it's worth the 4 or 5 days of setting this up. Will pay dividends within a couple of months. We want our build server to be again, doing a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So running our unit tests, running our Selenium tests for us, implementing our style cut rules, getting that effectively being the first point of our technical QA process. It's validating all the work that we're doing for us. There's a ton of build servers out there. I'm not going to particularly advocate one. We use TeamCity, Jenkins, Bamboo, whatever you choose. They all do a good job. There's a really good talk from Anthony Dang on automation from the 2012 UK Festival. It's really worth watching. And on the deployment front, there's MS Deploy and Octopus Deploy is the one that we use. Million-dollar question across, when we're working with larger teams is, where do we put our database? Do we have a shared database? Do we have multiple local databases on our developer machines? And there's pros and cons to each approach. If we've got a shared database, the pro is synchronization predominantly. Changes made by one developer are immediately available on everybody's machine. If devs are working with local databases, 3 devs working on the same project and they've all got local databases, they all have to keep telling each other the Umbraco changes they're making, and they're still going to run into some problems. With a shared database, there's some considerations around access. Again, if you're working with a freelancer and they're working externally, how are you going to give them access to your internal network, your internal shared database? And also, there's a bit of a challenge around destructive changes. So if I'm working on a feature and another developer is working on a similar feature and working from a shared database, and I come to a bit of a dead end and I realize I probably shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have changed that document type. I need to do a different approach. I might have to revert those changes and cause the dev that's working on a similar feature some problems. So there's a bit of a communication challenge there. Working with local databases, obviously, access is a bit of a pro. You've always got access if you're on the train or whatever. You can carry on developing. Synchronization is an issue, obviously, like synchronizing your Umbraco changes between your development team. And it's also quite hard to understand who has the head, whose local development environment has the trunk, effectively, of our Umbraco config. We opt for predominantly a shared database strategy. So the development environment in the kind of like the bottom left, that's kind of our office. We have a shared database amongst all of our developers. Because we've invested in a really, really good lease line, not contended with any other companies. For developers working from home, or we're working with their agency, actually it is feasible for those people to connect into our internal shared database from another office. If the internet connection isn't so good, then we can look to use tools like Usync. I don't know how many of you have heard of that. I've got a couple of slides coming up. It's really handy for deployments, but it can also be handy for kind of merging changes between Umbraco databases. It effectively serializes your Umbraco configuration to text files so that you can merge database changes across different environments. So we commit our Usync files into source control, and then we use continuous integration to kind of deploy those changes through the stack. So a bit on Usync, actually. So what it is, allows us to source control our Umbraco configuration files. It serializes Umbraco configuration, document types, data types, to XML files that are stored on the file system. We can put them into source control, and because they're XML, they can be merged. Gives us control over which changes we're merging. If we're merging with another developer, across branches, that kind of thing. Puts us in control of seeing what those changes are and whether we want to merge them or not. We can deploy them through continuous integration. There's a few issues, a few challenges to get around. Merges can sometimes be complex. Because of the way our Umbraco changes are serialized, sometimes quite a simple change in Umbraco can mean that the serialized files, it looks like a lot's changed, so it makes the merges quite complex. But it's kind of a nice problem to have because it means that we can still see what those changes are. We've got control whether we accept them or not. And sometimes complex data types can be tricky to manage through Usync when we've got a data type that might have a serialized ID from another data type stored within its value. Usync doesn't always know that that's another data type, and migrating those changes can be difficult. But it's been rewritten from the ground up. It's built by a guy called Kevin Jump. He's here today. It's worth chatting to him if you bump into him. Comes with a dashboard now, so you can control your Umbraco changes, your synchronization from within the Umbraco back office. You can see what's changing before you do anything, and it's got an API as well. And it's when you're working across a large team, a distributed team, or in a continuous integration situation, Usync's kind of worth its weight in gold. Really easy to configure. I'm not sure whether this is changing in the later version, but it's quite hard to see on the screen. But there's a couple of flags here that where you can tell Usync whether you're serializing your changes to disk, or whether you want those changes from disk to be read and to update Umbraco when the app pool starts up. And this is just, yeah, a very simple serialization of a doc type, but really simple XML. So as you can see, it's quite easy to do those merges when you need to. So on to project management. It's obviously a critical part of any project to keep the project being productive, to empower us as developers so that we're not blocked when we're developing, to increase as productive and particularly to make sure that we're productive across teams if you're working in a collaborative situation. And there's certain challenges to be faced there with perhaps differences in standards, in process, if you're collaborating, different developers working in different ways, there's a lot of challenges there. First and foremost, regular communication. Again, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Whatever your methodology is, agile, waterfall, whatever, have regular, concise meetings every single day. If you're working with a freelancer, get them on the phone, have a Skype conversation in the morning, just a real simple scrum to understand what they did yesterday, what you're doing today, any blockers, that kind of thing. Make sure they happen, no excuses, same time every day. And it's amazing how much can be solved just by having those really, really simple meetings every day. Make sure there's a project owner, somebody within the project, your team, someone else's team that you're collaborating with, that knows the project inside out, a BA, somebody who you can go to as a first port of call for any question. The more that project information is kind of distributed between different people, the higher propensity there is for error. So get somebody who's owning the project from start to finish. Separate out your client services from your project management, and this is a bit of a controversial point. A lot of agencies use producers these days, which is kind of a mix between project manager and an account manager. We don't think it works. We've tried it. The roles of an account manager and a project manager are very different. Project manager's there to deliver what's been built on time, to make sure that the risks are managed and that we're going to deliver what's been asked. Doesn't want to be concerned with this new feature that's coming in, what the next project is, taking the client out for dinner, all that kind of stuff. When that role becomes combined, stuff starts to get confused. The attention goes off the project delivery and becomes focused on servicing the client. Separate those roles out, and again, you start to pay dividends from day one. Try and increase ownership and involvement. As developers, we're often at the end of the line, at the end of the project, and we've passed a load of stuff to go and build that we've not really been asked any advice on. How can we own that? It's really tricky. Get everybody involved at every stage of the project. Get your QA, your PM, your senior dev, your junior devs involved in the requirements gathering. The more those members of the team have heard the requirements from the horse's mouth, the easier it is to understand the rationale behind why that feature is needed, about how it's going to be built. And the more we can inform them, if we can, if they're asking for, I want a really, really cool contextual search, we're able to advise them that maybe the geolocation API is going to make those results more relevant. Try and get everybody involved at every stage of the project, and so it's not just this silo kind of passing on of information. Invest in your tooling. You're probably all using it already, but don't rely on conversation and emails. Get some tool in place, Basecamp, Podio, Zendesk, Slack, whatever. But make sure that everybody knows it inside out and then they use it on a regular basis, so you've got a single point of truth to go back to for those all-important conversations. Define your process. We're doing a lot of work on this at the moment. This is our process diagram internally, and it goes from pre-sales through to sales, project setup, UX, creative, project management, development, UAT, warranty, support. It includes deliverables, process, where we might create a folder on Google Drive, where we might bill the client, etc. Everybody needs to know this inside out. Freelancers join. If they don't know that they're going to commit something to source control at a certain point, the project's going to miss. You're going to miss something. Get your process down. Get everybody to understand it in full. Make it a checklist for the project that somebody's responsible for making sure it's completed throughout the project. If you don't know your process, how the hell are we going to work with this project? So define it and make it your Bible. Ours goes from, as I say, from pre-sales to support, includes all this stuff, sprint process, QA, UAT, warranty, retrospectives, a ton more. It's really, really important. Invest in some sort of resourcing tool. Project plans and calendars aren't enough. Be in a position so that you can predict rather than respond to your resourcing requirements. We use a tool called ResourceGuru. It just allows us to book our resources ahead of time. People, meeting rooms, whatever they may be. We can block book stuff across 3 or 4 weeks. We can book 7 or 8 things into a single day. We can filter by project. We can run reports. Make sure your holidays are booked tactically. Speaking from experience, make sure your QA is available during the UAT period, that kind of thing, you know. Don't get tripped up by this kind of stuff. Use a tool that allows you to plan it effectively. The tool we use is called ResourceGuru. I really heavily recommend it. Try and get a good balance of senior and junior developers. Don't give your really, really big, complex project to a junior and expect it to go successfully. Equally, don't give all your cool stuff to your senior developers because your junior developers are not going to get any better. Try and get a good balance of the two so that you're a learning organization, you're always improving your process, and your projects will be more successful as a consequence. Spend the time to define your handover documents. If that's a handover document from a particular stage or a handover document when somebody goes on holiday, have a format that ensures that any communication about a project or a deliverable is recorded and understood, and that it's always filled in. So when someone's on holiday, they've not, this vital piece of information isn't locked away in somebody's head who's on a boat in Greece or something. Define the format and just make sure it's filled in. Spend the time to consider your specifications. As I said before, we've all been handed this massive specification document. It's been written by a junior PM that's been based on some kind of Chinese whispers, and it's 1,000 pages long, and it tells us absolutely nothing. Specification document, I mean, this I've just written this. It's a comprehensive document that means the same thing to all parties. It's watertight to build, test, and sign off from. Look at the specification methodologies that are around there. We spent a lot of time on this. We've ended up using what's called a BehaviorDriven Development methodology. What it does is remove the ambiguity around the specifications. It allows us to tie together all of our specification suite of documents, our wireframes, our functional and technical specification documents. But most importantly, it becomes the de facto standard for documentation across all parties. It tells the developer exactly what it is that they need to build. It tells the QAs exactly what it is that they need to test. And it tells the BAs and the clients that all of their requirements have been understood. And it does this in a really, really concise language format. It starts with a user story, as most kind of specifications do. They get fleshed out in what's called acceptance criteria. These acceptance criteria are written in what are called given, when, then scenarios. So given an initial context, so given I'm a user, or given I'm an authenticated user, or given I'm a CMS administrator, when an event occurs, so when I click on something, then ensure an outcome, then I should be redirected to a page, or I should see a pop-up, or something else should happen. An example of, for the wireframe that we see here, given I'm a user, when I click on the image in the banner, then I should be redirected to the offers page. And again, you can see that really, really nicely defines for the developer how something should function, to the QA, how they should test something, and to the client that their requirements have been understood. And you end up with multiple snippets of these acceptance criteria for every story. Really easy to write, really easy to read, really easy to sign off from. When collaborating with other agencies or other parties, or even with a client, have the difficult conversations up front. When you've just won that big pitch, you go out and having a beer, discuss deliverables, discuss risk, discuss timescales, all those challenges that you kind of felt a little bit unsure about when you were pitching. Have those difficult conversations up front, because if you leave them until you're into, the part way through a project, they're going to come and bite you in the ass. Like, have them up front when everybody's mates, and you can solve those problems and mitigate any risks early on. Again, define your process document. If you're working particularly with another agency and you've got different processes, there's going to be differences in how you work. If you're working with an agency and they offer a 6-month warranty period and you only offer 2 weeks, and that you find that out when you get into the warranty period. That's gonna hurt later on. So get your process document down with the partner you're collaborating with, see where there's differences and see how you can mitigate those risks. Get your terminology straight and understood. Again, freelancers, contractors, other agencies, you might be partnering with a UX or creative agency. We partner with an agency who predominantly use Drupal, and I have no idea how the voodoo within Drupal works whatsoever. What I do know is that what is a template to us in the Umbraco world is not a template in the Drupal world. And it's caused problems because they give us some markup or give us some wireframes or some creative, and because the concept of a template means very different things, the deliverables that we're expected to produce will be very different. So we'll try and understand any difference in terminology. And make sure you all understand your documentation. Make sure that any standards are understood, specs are signed off, obviously, that kind of thing. So on to standards. What we're aiming for is consistency. As I say, development teams grow, freelancers join, and everybody likes developing in different ways. I'm not trying to stifle any kind of creativity, but we are trying to create an environment where the code that we write is similar across the agency, that it speaks the same language. Again, so it's supportable in the future, and when that contractor's left, that you're going to be able to pick it up and run with it later. So we're trying to ensure that we have a standard way of developing across the development teams, but also to be efficient in the way that we apply those standards. And there's a couple of things I can recommend that help with that. It's not good enough or easy enough to have your standards defined. You know, when your back's against the wall and you're starting a project and you've got this big standards document to get your head around, it's going to be skipped and you're going to take some shortcuts. You need to be proactive and efficient in the way the standards are applied, effectively ensuring that newcomers can run quickly too. So it starts with getting defined and understood. Any design patterns you're going to use, any accessibility standards you're going to conform to, browser compatibility, frameworks you're going to be using, that kind of thing. Get them written down on paper, get your team to know them. But as I say, that's not enough. We implement an internal pull request mechanism as the first part of our kind of QA process. So effectively, any commits that are sent into Source Controller are QA'd by a senior developer, whoever's on pull request for that day. That allows a senior developer to firstly look for any glaring holes in any for any bugs or something, but secondly to try and understand if the standards have been adhered to. Really, really good process. Immediately start improving the quality of your code. But it's a reactive, as good as pull requests are, it's a reactive mechanism. If a developer's been working on a feature for 3-4 days and they commit a couple hundred lines of code and standards haven't been adhered to, pull request's going to get rejected and it's going to require a lot of rework. It would have been way more productive to have incrementally been applying those standards as the developer was writing their code. So you use tools, so automate it. So you use tools like StyleCop, like ReSharper. Once you've defined your standards, use these tools to apply them when you're building. It's not going to solve every problem, but you can get 60-70% of the way there of getting these tools to automatically apply your standards as you're building. And then that makes the pull request mechanism even more effective. Once your standards are being applied in an automated way, the senior dev isn't spending their time checking over standards in the pull request. They can spend looking at other things, more valuable things. And again, there'll be a bit of a learning curve and it will take a bit of a time to get going, but in a month's time, the quality would have shot through the roof and you start to pay dividends. And if all else fails, if you've implemented all of this stuff and you're working across a large team and you've still got problems, try this stuff and it'll probably solve 80% of your issues. So have you committed your code to Git? Have you pushed it to Git? Have you pulled? Have you merged? Have you built in Visual Studio? Have you deleted your Umbraco config file? Have you cleared your browser cache? Have you republished your content in Umbraco? And have you re-indexed your examine indexes? And again, when working with more than one developer on a project, the troubles you're going to run into are largely concerned with this kind of stuff being committed that shouldn't have been, stuff not being built, Umbraco caches out of sync, that kind of thing. Run through this and it'll probably solve 80% of your problems. It's by a guy called Kevin Blake. I just found it on the internet, but we all do it, but it's quite nice to have it as a checklist. And that's it. Any questions? Well, the transforms that we wrote, sorry, the question was using config transforms and how we share those throughout the team. We just commit them into source control as part of the project. Really simple, and then you can just execute them using Snowcheater within the individual development environments.
It's a great process, and good to see from the end, so you can see the other side of it as well.
Yeah.
What would you say, minimum, not to ask you financials, but say maybe in terms of daily effort of the project, or would you apply that to the process?
Particularly the process bit of the...
Yeah, I mean, full specification and doing everything exactly as you should do.
I think it depends on... So the question was, how much time would this stuff take on an average project?
Basically, how are you covering that overhead?
Yeah. A lot of this stuff you do not as part of your project. So setting up your CI system, getting your branching strategy in place, all that kind of stuff. It's not part of a project. It's stuff you just need to do now to get the agency in shape. And then the stuff that you kind of do on project, so writing the specification, that kind of thing, I don't know, it depends on the size of the project. But an average project for us, which might be, I don't know, 2-3 months, something like that. Probably talking between 7 to 10 days worth of requirements gathering and specification, amends, that kind of thing. So that's specifically around the spec part of it.
I like the idea of all the devs working together and sharing all that code. Do you have any examples where you had content people involved as part of that process and how you managed to transfer content from different environments?
Yeah. So the question is effectively managing content to be synced between different environments, or not solved that yet. So there is a Usync content edition. So where you've got Usync for Umbraco config stuff. There's a Usync for content. We've not used it since its early days. There was a few issues. Courier, Umbraco Courier works if you know where its limitations are and how to use it. But there's been a lot of improvements with Courier recently, so that's hopefully going to become a bit more, a bit better. Cool.